Future-Proof, the Cloud Payroll and HR podcast powered by PaySpace.
Future-Proof is for forward thinkers with a cloud-first strategy who want to eliminate inefficiencies, reclaim their time, and improve compliance.
We interview a payroll practitioner and HR leaders, business experts to explore how they future-proof their business. A new way of moving fast on cloud technology to win their market from anywhere on any device.
Stories about their highs and lows and actions they took in these times.
Hosted by Tammy Lewis
and Heinrich Swanepoel.
We'd like to welcome our first guest to our new podcast that we are hosting. And with that, I'd like to introduce her to you. Tinka, I'm going to hand over to you. If you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your experience in the payroll industry and essentially who Tinka is.
My name is Tinka Pretorius. I'm the Regional Payroll Manager for Ericsson for the Sub-Saharan Africa region. So currently I have 30 countries that I'm managing. I started my career in finance. I was a financial accountant by profession. I worked for a couple of big other companies in South Africa, ABI and SAB. Then when they created their shared service center, I moved to the shared service center and I took on a position as a payroll financial accountant. And then I got an opportunity to go to Ericsson. And that is where my path with Ericsson started 12 years ago.
Wow. And Tinka, funny enough, I was sort of snooping on your LinkedIn and I see you actually had like a certified sort of payroll practitioner education that you also did.
Yes. So I'm a member of the Payroll Association for South Africa. They started the certification of payroll professionals 2 or 3 years ago. And then I've done mine.
Excellent. Tinka, and tell us a little bit, sort of just Ericsson, what industry are they in? For me, it's sort of a household name. I think sort of it's a company that has done amazing things in the industry, but just tell us a little bit about Ericsson and the industry and what does your job entail at Ericsson?
So currently we are busy targeting the growth market where our technology can make a difference and is relevant. So for example, Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing. Then IoT connectivity, connected vehicles, security and edge computing. So innovation is at the core of Ericsson. So that's the bigger picture. So for me, we have 4 regions in Ericsson. So for Sub-Saharan Africa, I'm responsible for the 30 countries at the bottom of Africa. And then we have our unit head is sitting in Dubai and he's managing the Middle East countries. So for payroll, I think the biggest focus for us has been for the last 4 years, focusing on automation, standardization and centralizing of payroll services.
I think sort of everybody moving into Industry 4.0 and there's a lot of articles going around the sort of digital transformation. I think just to take a step back, and what was it coming into Ericsson, the processes back then? Because I think Ericsson's is, if I'm not correct, has always had a footprint in Africa. Was there a stage where it was pretty manual and then got more digital?
When I started in payroll in Ericsson, we were at that point with a small payroll company. At that point, it was Payday. Then we decided to move the payroll to another provider. At that point, it was VIP. So the countries that we covered at that point was only South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique. So it was the countries around South Africa. We processed payroll on VIP up to 2012, but that was done in South Africa by a team. Then they decided to outsource payroll. At that point, I decided to take a position outside of payroll as a project manager, still in Ericsson. And to me, I think it was one of the most educating positions that I have been, because it was something totally new. And I think that prepared me for coming back to payroll. So in 2016, the beginning of 2016, the HR director approached me to ask me if I will come back to payroll and head up payroll for the countries that we were busy with at that point. And when I started with the countries that we had at the point, VIP was still managed on a local desktop. We did backups every month. So in that, there was the own challenges. Then we decided to put it on a server, which is also a challenge because you cannot have a server that is connected to all the other servers, especially because then it might be an information breach. So they bought a server just for payroll that was not connected to the rest. Then at the same time, we had some challenges with payrolls in the West African countries, Nigeria, and the East African countries. So we decided to bring it all in and have it managed from South Africa. So there you had a mix of how it was handled. So for example, in West African countries, it was done from Senegal by a tax advisor who had a resource that was sitting in the Ericsson office. Then you had a local person in Nigeria that was doing it in Nigeria for Nigeria and Sierra Leone. And we had a resource that was sitting in East Africa that was doing it for Kenya. There was different platforms, there were different providers. So in late 2016, we started with the process of selecting a new vendor. So then we started looking at a number of vendors. And what I liked about PaySpace at that point was the fact that I love analytics. So analytics, the fact that it is cloud-based. Then also what was, to me, was at that point, we faced a lot of issues with the tax in a number of these countries, especially in the previous system, you had to write a method. The tax tables was not built in, like in the case of South Africa. So that was one of the biggest challenges. We faced a lot of issues with maintaining the tax. So then we started with the process of an RFP. We shortlisted 3 companies, and in the end, we decided to go with PaySpace. So that's just in a nutshell the process.
That is, it's been quite a journey. If you sort of just think about the career and project management in its own is a different breed. I've got a lot of respect for our project managers, maintaining all that strings at once and sort of communicating to everybody. And but just as you said, keeping that calculations up to date and maybe sort of building those calcs is an effort on their own. But no, it's very interesting. So you've mentioned how many countries again, just in context, is sort of falling under your profile at the moment?
30.
30. And that's 30 in Africa?
Yes. It's all in Africa.
And I believe it's sort of covering from west to east to SADC, because I think there's 52 countries in Africa. And if you're doing 30, it's more than half.
Yes.
And just out of curiosity, probably a lot of expats as well. Or is that more sort of in-country people?
Okay, so it used to be, a few years ago, it used to be a lot of expats. When we started in South Africa, there was 113. But there's a big drive in Africa to transfer the skills. So at this point, there is a number, but it's not as much as it used to be. And in Nigeria, you also used to be a lot. And the last time I checked, there was only 3 now for Nigeria.
Oh, that's quite cool. And have you been fortunate enough to travel into Africa, Tinka?
So in 2015 and 16, I was privileged with Ericsson to travel to 20 African countries. That was quite an experience. So I've traveled to Europe, to 3 countries, and I always say that in Africa, people are very scared. I used to travel alone, and I've never felt threatened.
I should ask us, what's your best country and what's your worst country?
I think Kenya is...
In Africa.
Yeah. In Africa. Yeah. I think Kenya is beautiful. To me, it was the most beautiful country. And the worst one, I would say, people usually say Nigeria. I've been to Nigeria 3 times. It wasn't that bad. The worst country to me was Madagascar. And not because it's a bad country, but because it's so poor. So I think that one was the worst for me.
I've heard sort of the infrastructure. I haven't been to Madagascar. I've heard sort of infrastructure there is like you said, sort of the money there isn't infrastructure. It's quite a small country and you struggle to actually get from town to town. But no, interesting. Tammy, do you have any questions on that?
I think from the African countries, I think it's something that I'm very envious of. I haven't traveled to the African countries yet. I know my sister loves traveling to the African countries, and so I always get the tea and the touristy items back from everyone's travels. But I have been involved in a lot of the African countries, and I also understand what a lot of work it is to get to know all the different legislations, because I think when you are grounded in a country, you're more likely to understand all the legislation and statutory compliances. So from your point of view, Tinka, managing all those African countries, it must have taken a lot of time to manage that previously, I'm assuming. Has anything changed in that perspective, managing all those countries, especially taking this last year into consideration where most things have adopted a cloud strategy and become a little bit more easily accessible as well?
When we took over Senegal, or took over all the countries that was managed from Senegal, you can imagine the culture is quite different. So for me, as a woman, to go there and say, now we're going to take it over, it was a bit emotional. So when we brought it back and we started auditing and analyzing, some of the methods that was built in wasn't updated for 3-4 years. So the approach I took there was to get as much information as I could and then analyze and start to standardize. If you look at, for example, in Senegal, you can have more than one wife. So that was one of the interesting factors. So that has a tax implication. Your number of dependents in the country has a tax implication. The other thing in Senegal, these people are quite knowledgeable on their tax. So they want the tax to be periodic, but then at the end of the year, they want it annualized. So that was quite a learning curve for them as well, because in the past, so what happens is if you get, for example, addition to your family in the middle of the year, the benefit is backdated to January. So if there's a child born, although the child is born in the middle of the year, it needs to be backdated to January. And if you, and it sounds simple, but if you are, your tax is periodic, it will only start to apply now from June. But then at the end of the year, they want all of their benefits. So the payroll software, they wasn't able to accommodate that. So what happened is you would go through your full payroll year, and then at the end of the year, the exercise to annualize was manual. So that in itself is problematic, because to me, as coming from finance as well, you always go back to your source. So it needs to be in your payroll software or in your financial system. So there was a lot of manual intervention. Something else that horrified me when I got there is they would process payroll, and then if there were changes after payroll was closed, they would do it on the side and then forget to do it in the payroll. So that was also, I think, discipline. And then the other big thing that at first was quite a lengthy process, or to build in the discipline of deadlines. That was something that was also that was quite a task.
I think being an analytical person as well, I think that's sort of been my grievance as well, to try and manage those deadlines from all those different aspects and different priorities as well in the different teams. It's quite interesting about the Senegal tax implications of backdating and having to manage that. I think that's quite a stressful task to manage for any payroll administrator. So I think well done on that and getting that all sorted. I can hear that analytics and reporting is quite important to you, and keeping a bird's eye view on everything. Is this something that's quite important to you, making sure that everyone's on board? Is that something that you manage on a daily basis, or have a look at it on a daily basis, or how do you do that?
Okay, so something that comes to my mind that I want to share is, I think one of the biggest challenges is if you have 30 countries and it's all on different software and different platforms. If you have to provide a report to group, you need to now take all those reports and make sure that there's one set of reports. They didn't want everything on a different template. So that was one of, to me, if I think back, that was taking the most of, or taking up the most of my time to incorporate all these reports into one. So you were asking report-wise. So I have a governance model that I drew up when in 2017, and I can say to you that I think when I start talking governance, even I don't know that is the our account manager for PaySpace, he just rolls his eyes, because to me governance and the same thing needs to be governed every month, the same set of rules. So we have quite a detailed process in Ericsson and even in payroll. So what we do is we create a position when someone starts. The whole recruiting position and everything starts with SAP. Then once the position is created, the cost center is loaded, there's a profile for a person. The salary is also captured on SAP. So that is then our first source of information. Then we have an automation tool where input, for example, overtime, standby is captured by the employee themselves. And then we have a second tool, that's the HR variable tool, where the HR manager will provide input. It goes through a process flow, workflow, and once it's approved, on the 5th of each month, we will extract the report, and that is what we use for payroll input. Now, just to get everyone on board, and using those platforms was also a process. But at this point, we do not accept any manual input. We do not accept any changes except if it has gone through the set process and tools. So once we then we have a team in India that is the processing team. They will take the data and make sure that it is in the correct format. Now we have standardized the formats so that it is in the PaySpace format. But still, if you on the HR variable tool, for example, a HR manager might add a comment which will tell you exactly what needs to happen, or what you need to add. For example, if there's back pay or something needs to be recalculated, so that is then the source where we get that from. Once that is done, it will be uploaded to PaySpace in order for them to process. Then we also have a signed off calendar each month. So the calendar, that is a calendar for everybody. For example, the deadlines for the employees, the deadlines for the HR managers, then input deadline, processing deadline, checking, and then once it's done, final pack issue. Once that is done, it's shared with the HubSpoke. We call it the HubSpoke team in India. They prepare and balance, create the MPs. Then the MPs is sent to the HR manager for approval. We send it to our payment center, which is in India. That's the first release. Then our second release is in Indonesia. So it's quite a process. So I feel it's very important to make sure that you have a proper governance model, that your deadlines are set. And then make sure that everyone gets proper training. So we have training on a monthly basis, and for each of the processes, there's a process guide. For the process on PaySpace side and process on the Ericsson side, I think that is very important, because if you have we call it processing Bibles, everyone is aware of what needs to happen. So that is in a nutshell how we handle the monthly process.
God, that is, I love sort of the way you've put it, in just having those rule books where somebody can refer to and say, this is the process for X, Y, and Z. And while you were talking about India, that's one of my bucket list countries that I still want to visit. And have you been, Tinka? Or?
No, I haven't been to India.
Okay.
I haven't been to
Okay.
India.
No, I needed to ask. Now, I wanted to ask sort of, has the company had a cloud strategy, but sort of based on what you've said and just knowing Ericsson, you guys are leaders in 5G and a lot of digital transformation. Is there a cloud strategy within the company as well?
Yes. So something that I think a lot of people, for us, it's something that is just a given. So we are solely cloud-based, and we've moved to only use that as our where we want to and have to store all our policies, documents. So, and I think that the fact that we've done that even before the lockdown has helped us immensely, because we don't physically sign any document. Every document gets sent to you via email. We call it secure drives for each country to make sure that only the person that is working with that data has access to it. We also, each of the employees, not only payroll, uses a secure drive where all his documents are stored, so that when a laptop crashes or is stolen or whatever happens, you can always restore the data that person was working on. I think that to me, that's very important. Now, if I talk to people in the same industry that we are in payroll, especially when we meet for the Payroll Association, when there's discussions, you would not know how many of these companies are still only using hard copies, input for overtime, contracts. Everything is still manual, and that still needs to be archived, and there still needs to be an index. So I think, if I can say, we were already ready before the COVID-19 situation. So we didn't have any challenges in that regard.
In terms of the move over to a cloud strategy, can you give us an idea of the time or even money that you've saved in adopting a cloud strategy?
If I think a cloud strategy, time-wise, I think if you need to quantify the time or define what amount you saved on just time, if I just think about in my role, it used to take me up to 5 days to consolidate a report that I needed to share with management on a monthly basis. So that just in my role. Then if you look at before we started this process, I had 6 people in the department just handling input. And with automation and cloud, storing everything on the cloud, we were down to 2. So that makes a huge difference if you just think about people-wise. But then if you look at cost, for example, archiving of documents, firstly, it is making sure that all the documents are available. You had to have someone that physically sat and archived or filed the documents that you processed. Then once it is filed, you also had to move those documents to the archive department, especially because there's no space. So that, and then storage fees on these documents, as well as cost to retrieve it. So I think if you have to quantify, you would be astounded to see how much money you are saving just by making sure that your documents are cloud stored on the cloud. And then if you think about if you have to, now we in Nigeria, auditing companies going back as far as 2011. Now, if all of that is still in archive, it is a very time-consuming exercise, which you would then, it's cost for the resources doing it, and also the cost of sending those documents back and forth.
Funny enough, there's two things sort of jumping to mind, and I still love my book. I still sort of write things down, and I try and keep a journal. But things we've seen and things I've experienced, sort of that change management that goes with digital transformation. That's probably the hardest thing in getting people to adopt new processes. And I think it's sort of a hybrid approach. There's still an element of where things needs to be a little bit manual just to keep that governance, but as well as then sort of having that access to that information sort of makes a lot of sense. There's one colleague of mine, she since day one, she's been keeping sort of all her notes on iPad. And funny enough, we recently sort of got certified for big HR software. And she was saying, look at this cool trick. And she actually sort of just searched on her iPad notes, and all the clients she's met that's using that software was actually there. So I said to her, yes, if I just had all of 7 or 8 books of mine that I've written through the years now to actually go and page through them, it would have been so much a different exercise. But yeah, it just goes to show sort of what that documentation, and then it's sort of it's just documenting that in the archive that we can easily access, and sort of using that to your advantage. I think you've mentioned it, Tinka, but the sort of again, I'm going back to the history, but backups and updates is something we've seen with our clients that's quite historic. And you've mentioned you're going to some meetings where we're having communities around payroll and talking about input and automating. Can you still remember doing backups for payrolls or updates for payrolls? You've mentioned sort of calculations in Africa. So who did those backups? Who did those updates?
So there was a schedule for the backups. So what used to happen is everyone had to make sure that they out of the payroll, and you could do the backups, say for example on the last day of the month. Then you had to make sure that those backups are saved on CDs, and the CDs should be saved in a secure storeroom or a safe. Now, that sounds very simple, but then the other problem is if you didn't do your backup properly, then you might have a problem with your CD, and then the backup you cannot restore the backup. So I think that in itself was just challenging. But you tend to get used to the new normal quite easily. I had to, when you invited me to this podcast, I had to think hard of what we used to do a few years ago, and we would think we're not dinosaurs anymore. Now we can actually the same activity that took you 2 weeks, you can now do in 2 days. So that to me made a big difference in my life.
Just sort of saying things that take sort of ages, or not ages, it took longer to do it where it's now sort of consolidated. Another question that sort of came to mind is this, you transitioning from an in-house to an outsourcing. How has that role changed for you as from a payroll perspective, the governance? Has there been a change in your job, if I can put it like that?
If I take it back, and a lot of times when I'm in a forum where there's payroll people that discuss this, I think people still today tend to manage people and not the work. So the move of the mindset change. So firstly, now if someone do not have anything on his desk, that does not mean he's not working. So that's the first thing. Then when we were still doing it in-house, it was still paper-based. You had to physically check. So there were you had one person capturing, one person checking. Then once that is done, and you captured, now there's someone that needs to download the reports, check the reports, and sign it off. So I used to do that. With automation, there's a lot of, for example, on cloud analytics, I extract my report. There's checks that was built in there that now with just pulling one report, you can verify and check a number of different activities. So in that sense, I would say it's still for people a big mindset change to move from in-house to outsource. When I have the discussion with other people, they will say, but how do you know that everything runs smoothly? So that comes back to my project mindset, where firstly you need to make sure that your guiding rules is set. Then that, like I said, you have a standard calendar with deadlines. You have standard set of reports. Then your rules. I will emphasize rules every time that we do the payroll, because if you deviate from a rule, let me give you an example. We have a country manager allowance, and you have a policy which states how it should be calculated. Before we started with PaySpace, that was manually shared with you, and because there's so many documents, you know that there's a policy, but you get it from, for example, your HR manager as input. People didn't regularly go and make sure that was calculated correctly. But with making sure that your payroll is set up correctly and these components are calculating automatically, then you don't have to check that anymore, because it's not manual input, and two, there's a rule. It's automatically calculated. So I think outsourcing, if you talk to them, it's a mindset change. They first need to get over the issue of control, because for some it gives you the impression that now you lose control. But I don't think so. If you have a good team that is performing the activities on your side, and then your outsource partner also has a good team on their side, or your team keeps on changing, but what I mean is the process and guidelines, and then the governance. I think governance is very important. If your governance model is good, I think that we haven't had escalations, major escalations. We didn't have audit findings. So the biggest aim for me is to make sure that there's no audit findings.
Touch wood. No, it is. I think sort of the outsourcing team is doing quite a good job, and they had a record now where I think they had 0 errors for 3 or 4 months.
Yes.
Out of all the clients, and that was quite significant. I sort of said to the HOD, well done, it's unbelievable. And funny enough, we quite sort of go quite, not quite, we're a technology business that's focused a lot on service, and we've seen an increase in service in the last 2 years, and we want to always sort of beef up our experience to service. And outsourcing is one of the departments within PaySpace that's got the highest NPS. And recommendation from our clients. So no, it's a very sort of proud team, and I'm proud to sort of know them, if I can put it like that. Next question.
before we jump into that, Heinrich, something with Tinka is the tranquility in the way that you approach your different processes, your projects. I think I'm experiencing a euphoric, refreshing view on how to approach a project. I think especially when you have all those processes and policies in place and every person knows what their role is, regardless if they're stepping into the team or they've been doing it for years as well. I think that's the key to anything. So I definitely appreciate that. I think one thing that I'm quite curious about is I've noticed it in our team as well. And this last year that we've almost had to experience that forced remote working conditions and adjust to a little bit of a different work-life balance. Has anything significantly changed, not only in your personal work-life balance, but in your team as well? And did you have to adjust certain processes to accommodate this? How did you go about this?
We started working from home the 15th of March last year. I've managed a number of teams. I started managing teams when I was my first financial accountant position I got when I was 25. And at that point, I think when you're a manager for the first time, you tend to, if you see the people, they are working. And that's not always the case. So I think a lot of changes came. I started studying again when I was 27, and a lot of the projects and processes that I was interested in. One is emotional intelligence, project management, then finance. I've always been a financial person, and then making sure that the team around you is performing at their best. So when I took over the payroll team in Ericsson, when you work with someone in, for example, Nigeria, the personality is different. Then you also have a team member in Senegal and then Kenya. It's totally different people. And at first, you need to work remotely with these people. You need to make sure that you connect with them and you know them. I started a process of having a coffee meeting every week just to catch up. And I think there we really connected, because for that half an hour or hour, you would speak about nothing else. So just to make that connection. Now in South Africa, the team that was based in South Africa, because we only moved to India, the team to India last year. So the South African-based team members, if you walk in the morning and you say hi, and you see someone is down, you could pull them aside and say, let's have coffee. And that way you will connect with them. So you had a totally different connection. Then the lockdown started last year, and I think the first 3 months for everyone was quite difficult. One, it was emotional, and then also to get used to working remotely. So what I found is someone that was remotely based before the time adapted easier than the rest of the team. So the first 3 months, we had a lot of meetings to make sure that everyone knows what they are doing. But I've always been someone that I cannot manage. I'm not a timekeeper. So my sister is a lawyer in Pretoria, and we constantly had this discussion about how do you manage your people. So for us, if you come in, if you know that you need to work 8 hours a day and you come in at 8, you know when you need to leave. But I feel if you have a set of tasks and that is completed, then I'm happy, because I'm looking at the quality of your work. Then where if you manage someone like a clock watcher, it does not guarantee that that person will give his best. So even now, I have the mindset of this is your task. You have a set of KPIs that you have to meet. They have a checklist. So if by the 25th or whenever something is due, you share it with me and you are available if there's an emergency, there's a big focus in Ericsson on work-life balance, because if you look at and I look a lot at the statistics, if you look at the working the progress or the productivity when they measure it between different years, last year and the previous year, productivity went up in some industries with 40%. And I think it's because I used to live in Pretoria and drive to Sandton. I've been doing that for 17 years. So you used to spend from an hour to 2 hours on the road in the morning, and the same thing in the evening. And with even with lockdown, my husband went back to the office in February this year, and I got up at the same time. I started working at the same time. So all the time that you used to use for traveling, you're now using for work. So what I can say personally, I'm not a big people's person. If you financial, I don't think there's a lot of financial people that's a people person. But I started feeling disconnected and even lonely. Well, February was fine, then March, because when he gets home, he had a day. He's also managing a large group of people, so he just wants a bit of quiet time before you then started asking me, how was your day? So then I decided you need to make sure that if you're disconnected, you need to connect again. And I made the effort of, again, starting these coffee discussions, even with the team in India. And I think that helps a lot. I think it's important to make sure that you stay connected.
No, it's so true. It's. I was browsing LinkedIn because I said rather LinkedIn than Facebook. I could actually learn things on LinkedIn. But there was a post from somebody that said from Gartner where they said there was a 44% improvement in culture change based on remote working. And it's interesting how companies has actually adapted to this remote working. I think there's a lot of positives, but there's also negatives. There's a lot more you can do. And for me personally, I feel that we try and multitask more doing remote working, and you can see it when you're sitting in meetings and you can actually pick it up from people. It drains me sometimes to see that people are multitasking because I know their attention is not there. But I love that coffee idea. We had something similar in our team where we had like a coffee call every morning. It was 15, 20 minutes, and every morning somebody else had to actually present it and do something fun. It was questions, jokes, whatever it was, everybody sort of participated, and I absolutely loved it. And we thought on bringing it back. We've got some yeses and nos, but we meet quite often as well. Tinka, I'm going to ask you sort of the last question. It's one question we want to put into play for all the members that joins us. But if you had to describe payroll in a single word, what is that word for you?
Extraordinary. Most people think payroll is boring. But if I look back at the journey that we have gone through with payroll, I think it's extraordinary if you look at what you get, your input, and what you then deliver. All the different teams that's involved, what impact payroll has on the business. If you, for example, pay someone late or didn't add something, it has such a big impact on the rest of the company. In smaller countries like, for example, Togo, Burkina Faso, those countries, they will put down tools like they used to say in manufacturing. So that has a big impact on the company. I think maybe it's because I've been with Ericsson so long, but now if there's a question, there's questions that isn't even related to payroll, but people come to you and ask you. And that, I think, it's because of the impact that payroll has on not only the business, but also on employees. I've had that question before, and I thought on it long and hard. I could say if it is a very bad month, you can say tedious. But if I look at where we started and where we are now, I think payroll is extraordinary.
Great. Thank you so much for that.